My name is Samantha. I'm 34, and I was about to marry the man I loved in 2 months. His name is Evan, a structural engineer, meticulous, careful, the kind of man who measures twice and cuts once. Our life in Portland had been quiet, comfortable, even predictable. My rescue dog, Scout, curled at my feet, seemed to understand every nuance of our home, every flicker of tension or joy. That night, at Evan's parents' sprawling Lake Oswego estate, everything shifted. The dinner table was set for celebration, yet when Olivia, Evan's ex-fiancée, walked in unannounced, it felt like the air itself had changed. She didn't knock. She didn't ring the bell. She just strolled in with the familiarity of someone who owned the place. And there she was, sitting at the head of the table, smiling like everything was perfectly normal. Evan's parents exchanged awkward glances. My own heart thudded in my chest. I had ignored the signs, the keys she had to his parents' house, the endless presence at every event, the way she always seemed to know the right words, the right tone, to charm her way into every corner of our lives. Then the words hit me, spoken calmly, confidently, in front of both our families. Olivia will always be part of my life. She is family. If you cannot accept that, Samantha, then maybe you shouldn't marry me. Time slowed. Every eye in the room was on me, expecting a reaction. Rage? Begging? Apology? I felt the weight of every expectation pressing down, and yet, strangely, a clarity emerged in that moment. My voice, calm but resolute, broke the tension. Okay, just okay. I stood up, folded my napkin, and walked away from a $90,000 wedding that was supposed to mark the happiest day of my life. Walking away didn't feel like defeat, it felt like survival. That one decision sent shockwaves through both families, through Portland's social circles, and eventually through my own understanding of what a relationship could demand from a person. It was the beginning of a journey that would test my boundaries, my strength, and my sense of self in ways I could never have imagined. And that's where my story begins. The night I chose myself over a carefully scripted illusion of love. I was 32 when I first met Evan, and from the very beginning, I knew he was different. He wasn't flashy or overly charming in the conventional sense. He had a quiet confidence, a patience that showed in the way he fixed things around his little craftsman house in Selwood, the way he treated Scout, and the careful thought he put into every word he said. I worked as a development manager at a local arts nonprofit, the kind of job that demanded creativity, organization, and a constant balancing act between donors' expectations and artistic vision. I like to think I was independent, emotionally intelligent, and clear about my boundaries, but Evan's presence made all of that feel both easy and terrifying at the same time. We met at a fundraising gala for the nonprofit. I was juggling appetizers, donor questions, and event logistics when I literally bumped into him near the wine table. A clumsy collision, my glass almost tipping over, his hand catching it just in time. He apologized. I laughed nervously, and in that instant, something unspoken passed between us, a recognition that neither of us had been expecting. Over the next weeks, we ran into each other at small community events, sometimes grabbing coffee, sometimes discussing structural nuances of the city's old architecture, and slowly, effortlessly, a connection grew. It wasn't all smooth. Evan had an ex-fiancée named Olivia, a striking, charismatic woman who seemed to linger everywhere, even in places she didn't strictly belong. At first, I brushed it off. She was part of his past, right? He loved me. He told me so. And he was attentive in ways that made me feel secure. But her presence was persistent. Olivia had keys to his parents' house. She showed up at nearly every family gathering, and her influence on his family was undeniable. When I asked him about it, he would smile gently and say, "She's just part of our extended family. It's complicated, but it's not a threat." I tried to trust him, to ignore the little knots of unease that crept into my chest. For months, I immersed myself in our love story. Late-night walks through Portland's quiet streets, weekend trips to the coast, shared breakfasts where Scout would snuggle between us. Evan introduced me to his parents gradually, easing me into their world of polished manners, progressive ideals, and the kind of wealth that came with both opportunity and expectation. His mother, Marilyn, was warm but perceptive, always assessing people with eyes that could see past politeness. His father, Thomas, was less expressive, but his judgment was no less sharp. They welcomed me cautiously, testing, measuring, subtly questioning whether I belonged in Evan's life in a way that felt both intimidating and validating. During this period, Olivia remained a constant shadow. She was charming, articulate, and insidiously present, as though she had never left. Birthday parties, holidays, even casual Sunday dinners, she was there. Evan reassured me, but doubts persisted. I started noticing the small things, the way he tensed when her name came up, the subtle shifts in conversation when she walked into the room, the faint unease in his parents' glances when I tried to assert myself. Despite everything, I chose to believe in the man I loved. I reminded myself that healthy relationships required trust, not suspicion. I reminded myself that his past was just that, the past. And for a while, I truly believed it. Our love was intoxicating, and even the tension caused by Olivia's omnipresence couldn't fully dim the warmth we shared. We celebrated small victories together, my nonprofit launching a new arts program, Evan completing a complex restoration project, our shared apartment slowly becoming a home that reflected both of us. Looking back now, it's clear that the seeds of conflict were already planted. The subtle manipulations, the emotional undercurrents, the unspoken expectations, these were the foundation upon which the coming storm would build. I just didn't know it yet. I only knew the comfort of his hand in mine, the quiet trust in his voice, and the love that made me feel seen, even as shadows of doubt lurked just beyond the edges of my awareness. It started subtly, almost imperceptibly. The first time I noticed it, I brushed it off as coincidence. Evan would answer a text from Olivia with a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes, or linger a little too long on a voicemail. Sometimes his tone would shift ever so slightly when mentioning her name, like there was a secret I wasn't supposed to know. I told myself I was overthinking. After all, he loved me, right? He chose me. But the unease grew. Friends would mention seeing Olivia at events where I wasn't invited, and Evan's explanations, though seemingly reasonable, left an odd taste in my mouth. "She's just helping with a community project," he'd say, or, "I ran into her at the gallery. It was nothing." Yet the nothing always felt heavy, like a shadow pressing on the edges of our lives. Family gatherings became a minefield. His parents adored her, or at least seemed to. They would casually reference memories and inside jokes I had never been part of, and I could see Evan squirm, a subtle hesitation in his voice as he tried to bridge their world with mine. I began to feel like an outsider, constantly measuring my reactions, my words, my presence, trying to fit into a life already partially claimed by someone else. Evan noticed my tension. Sometimes he would brush it off with a chuckle. "Samantha, don't let your imagination run wild." Other times, he would offer reassurances that felt hollow, not because he didn't mean them, but because he couldn't see how deeply I was questioning the reality I had built. The more I tried to suppress my doubts, the more persistent they became, like tiny cracks slowly appearing in what I thought was a solid foundation. I started recalling moments from the early days, little comments Evan had made, ways Olivia seemed to appear wherever we went. Birthday parties, art openings, casual Sunday dinners at his parents' house, she was always there. At first it had seemed harmless. She was part of his past, part of his family circle, but now I couldn't ignore the pattern. It wasn't coincidence, it was deliberate. One evening, as we were preparing dinner together in our apartment, I asked, "Do you think she's too involved in your life?" My hands trembled slightly as I chopped vegetables, the knife feeling heavier than usual. Evan's face softened, but there was a flicker of impatience. "Samantha, she's not trying to interfere. She's part of our extended family. It's complicated, but it's nothing to worry about." I nodded, but inside, a knot tightened. Complicated? Nothing to worry about? My instincts, usually reliable, were screaming that something was off. I started noticing little inconsistencies, dates that didn't match, messages that disappeared, casual references to plans I hadn't been told about. Each detail seemed minor, but together they formed a mosaic I couldn't ignore. Even his friends began to subtly weigh in. "You know, Olivia's always been important to Evan, right?" one of them said, with a grin that didn't quite reach his eyes. "She's like family." The words were casual, almost teasing, but I felt the sting of exclusion. I realized then that everyone around him had already normalized her presence in a way that I hadn't. I was the newcomer, the one expected to adjust, to accept, to somehow fit into a narrative already written without my consent. By the time we sat down for that fateful dinner at his parents' house, the tension had been building for months. Every smile, every casual glance, every understated comment had been quietly preparing me for the confrontation I didn't yet know was inevitable. And yet, I felt oddly calm, as if the storm, when it finally broke, would clarify everything I had been feeling. The seed of conflict had been planted, nurtured by small betrayals, omissions, and emotional manipulations, and it was about to bloom in the most devastating way imaginable. The evening started like any other family dinner, though a little more formal. Evan's parents had set the table meticulously, polished silverware gleaming, crystal glasses catching the warm glow of chandelier lights. I arrived with a sense of quiet anticipation, thinking perhaps I could enjoy this night without tension. But I should have known. Nothing about this family's gatherings was ever simple. Olivia arrived, without warning, without knocking. She walked in like she owned the space, her confident smile brightening the room as if nothing unusual was happening. My heart immediately tightened. My pulse quickened. Scout, who usually wagged excitedly at new faces, sensed the tension too, huffing softly at my side. I forced a polite smile, but every fiber of me wanted to vanish. Evan, normally composed, froze for a moment. His fork paused midair. His parents' faces shifted subtly, eyebrows lifting, mouths tightening in polite shock. I felt the weight of their gaze, and then came the words I would never forget. Olivia, calm, poised, and perfectly self-assured, said, "Olivia will always be part of my life. She is family. If you cannot accept that, Samantha, then maybe you shouldn't marry me." The room fell silent. The ticking of the clock seemed deafening. Time slowed, each second stretching into an eternity. My breath caught in my throat. My fingers clenched involuntarily in my lap. My mind raced, struggling to process how the woman standing at the head of the table, Evan's ex-fiancée, the shadow that had always loomed over us, had just issued a public ultimatum. I could see it in Evan's eyes, a mixture of shock, hesitation, maybe even guilt. His parents nodded slowly as if she had just articulated some profound truth. My own parents' faces reflected disbelief. And Olivia, her expression was smug, almost triumphant, like she was performing a scene she had rehearsed countless times. I wanted to speak, I wanted to argue, to defend myself, to demand respect for my place in Evan's life. But the words caught in my throat. I felt the heat of humiliation rising, the sting of betrayal, the sickening weight of the unspoken implication. Evan had allowed this, perhaps even condoned it, and now the decision rested with me. I focused on my breathing, feeling Scout's fur under my fingers, grounding myself. The room seemed to shrink around me, the polished dining table a stage, everyone watching, waiting. I realized then that any reaction, shouting, pleading, negotiating, would only give her the satisfaction of control. "And so," I said quietly, deliberately, letting the words carry every ounce of strength I could summon. "Okay, just okay." I folded my napkin, slowly rose from my chair, and turned to my parents. "Let's go," I said, my voice steady. I felt their hands on my shoulders, warm and supportive, even as confusion lingered in their eyes. I could hear Olivia's breath catch, the smile faltering ever so slightly. For the first time, I saw the realization dawn on her face. She hadn't won. I had chosen myself, my dignity, my sanity. That night, I didn't just walk away from a wedding. I walked away from months of emotional manipulation, from a relationship built on illusions and shadows, from a future that wasn't meant for me. The $90,000 wedding deposits, the carefully planned ceremony, the registry, all of it became irrelevant. In the hours that followed, I emailed our wedding planner, canceling everything. The venue, the catering, the flowers, the band, everything. Evan's family had funded the deposits as a wedding gift. I owed nothing. I also closed out our joint wedding registry account, the culmination of months of saving and planning. I sent a brief message to Olivia's mother. "Thank you for dinner. I agree with Olivia. Some things aren't negotiable." Later that evening, when Olivia let herself into our apartment with her key, she was already crying. Her mascara had smeared, her hands trembling. I remained seated on the couch, Scout curled against my legs. Beside me, her belongings, clothes, books, crystals, skincare products, were packed neatly in boxes, labeled with meticulous care. "What is this?" she whispered, voice breaking. "You'll need to pick these up tonight," I said calmly. "I'll give you proper notice about the locks. You have until the weekend for anything I might have missed." Her voice rose an octave, disbelief and panic mingling. "You can't just throw me out of our home." "It's my home, Olivia. You were just staying here," I replied evenly. That's when the truth hit her, and I saw the fragile mask crack. For all her talk of emotional evolution, of testing boundaries, she had never intended to include me in her life. This was never about growth. This was always about control. I sat on my couch long after Olivia left, Scout's soft breathing grounding me, reminding me that some things in life were steady, reliable, and true. My chest ached, not from physical exertion, but from the betrayal, the humiliation, the sudden collapse of everything I thought was solid. The emotional weight pressed on me like a lead blanket, and for a moment I questioned everything. How did I not see this coming, I asked myself? Was I too naive, too trusting? The answer was complicated. I had seen hints, little inconsistencies, moments that didn't sit right, but I had rationalized them. I wanted to believe in Evan. I wanted to believe that our love could overcome past shadows. And more than that, I wanted to trust myself, to trust my instincts. I replayed that dinner over and over in my mind, the way Olivia walked in as if she owned the space, the smug smile, the audacity to issue her ultimatum in front of both our families. I saw the flicker of hesitation in Evan's eyes, the tight jaw of his mother, the polite horror of his father, and I felt a burning anger, not at Olivia alone, but at the entire charade, at the manipulations, at the lies that had been woven around me like a cage I didn't even know I was in. But beneath the anger was something else, grief. I grieved the wedding we had planned, the life we had imagined together, the simple joys that now seemed tainted by deceit. I grieved the image of Evan I had loved, the man I thought I knew. And I grieved myself for ignoring those quiet, persistent doubts, for giving trust so freely, for believing in promises that were never meant to include me. And yet, within the grief, there was clarity. The moment I folded my napkin and stood up, a quiet strength had surged through me, a recognition that my worth was not negotiable. I could not and would not allow anyone, no matter how charming or convincing, to redefine my boundaries. I realized then that walking away was not weakness. Walking away was courage. Walking away preserved my dignity, my sense of self, and my sanity. The next hours were filled with methodical action. I emailed our wedding planner to cancel everything permanently. I closed the registry account, ensuring that no part of my effort, my planning, or my money would be used to further Olivia's manipulations. I began sorting through our apartment, packing up Olivia's belongings with the same precision and care I applied to my work. Each item boxed, labeled, and set aside became a symbolic act of reclaiming my space, my life, and my autonomy. Throughout it all, I kept checking in with myself. I let myself feel the anger, the betrayal, the sadness, but I refused to let them control me. I wrote in my journal, late that night, "I am not a passive participant in my own life. I am not a character in someone else's experiment. I am Samantha, and my boundaries matter." Even as I processed the shock, I knew a confrontation with Evan was inevitable. I couldn't ignore the questions that hung in the air. Did he know? Did he condone this? Was there any part of him that truly intended to fight for us? I replayed our conversations, our moments of intimacy, trying to discern the line between the man I loved and the web of deceit I had been caught in. When I finally faced him, my emotions were raw, but my resolve was steady. "Evan," I said quietly, yet firmly, "we need to talk. I need to understand why this happened." He looked at me, guilt and confusion in his eyes, words caught between apology and explanation. I could see him struggle, fumbling for answers, realizing that the carefully constructed narrative he had been part of was unraveling. I didn't yell, I didn't scream. I let him speak, absorbing every detail, every half-truth, every excuse. But inside, I was already moving beyond needing justification. The clarity I felt after that dinner, the quiet but absolute understanding that my life, my boundaries, and my heart could not be bargained with, was unshakable. That night, alone with Scout, I allowed myself to cry, not for Evan, not for Olivia, but for me. For the woman who had been tested, manipulated, and underestimated. And as the tears flowed, I felt a shift, subtle but profound, a determination to reclaim my narrative, to rebuild my life on my terms, and to trust myself above all else. In the days following that fateful dinner, the tension didn't ease, it multiplied. Evan's parents, Thomas and Marilyn, had been polite at the table, but politeness has a way of hiding judgment. Now, off camera, behind closed doors, their disapproval erupted. Calls came almost daily, first hesitant, then insistent, filled with pointed questions and subtle accusations. "You're being hasty, Samantha," Thomas said one evening over the phone, his voice tight with frustration. "You're destroying something that could have been beautiful." I stayed calm, letting the words wash over me without attachment. "I'm not destroying anything," I replied evenly. "I'm refusing to be part of something that wasn't meant for me." But it didn't stop there. Marilyn sent texts full of guilt-laden pleas. "Think about Evan, about the family, about all the people who love you both. Are you sure this is the right choice?" The barrage of concern, delivered with every ounce of their wealth and social influence, was overwhelming, but I held my ground. Every call, every message, felt like another test, another attempt to make me doubt myself. Meanwhile, friends of Evan's began weighing in. Casual comments, subtle suggestions, invitations to talk it out, all coded in concern, but heavy with expectation that I would capitulate. Some friends even implied I had overreacted, that Olivia was just testing boundaries in a modern, enlightened way. And yet, amidst all of this external pressure, the evidence kept piling up. One evening, my best friend Noah sent me a photo, an innocent-looking snapshot that hit me like a thunderbolt. It showed Olivia touring an apartment in downtown Portland with her ex-fiancé, Rowan Pierce. On the application form, visible in the image, were two names, Olivia Hart and Rowan Pierce, co-tenants. I stared at the image, Scout whining softly at my side. My stomach churned. This wasn't a test. It wasn't a way to challenge my boundaries or see if I could adapt to a new paradigm of emotional openness. This was a plan, meticulously executed, right under my nose. The marriage, the engagement, all of it. It had been a cover story. I confronted Evan calmly that night. "Did you know about this apartment?" I asked, showing him the photo. His face paled, words fumbling. "Samantha, It's complicated." "Complicated?" I cut him off, my voice sharp but controlled. "Complicated doesn't involve secretly planning to live with your ex-fiancé while pretending it's a boundary test for me." The tension between us reached a breaking point. Evan tried to justify, to explain, to rationalize, but his words felt hollow, disconnected from reality. Every explanation sounded like another layer of manipulation, another attempt to keep me tethered to a lie. The pressure from outside, combined with this revelation, created a perfect storm. Evan's family increased their interference, subtly attempting to sway me with every conversation. Even some mutual friends, who had once been our allies, began to question my choices, framing my refusal as obstinance rather than self-respect. And then came the messages from the wedding planner, Grace, accidentally forwarded by Olivia's mother. They contained carefully orchestrated instructions for Rowan's role in the wedding ceremony, a speech, symbolic gestures, all planned weeks in advance. The realization hit me hard. This had never been impulsive. Every move had been premeditated. I had been a participant in a drama scripted by everyone else but me. The psychological weight of it was immense. I found myself waking in the night, heart pounding, replaying scenarios, analyzing conversations, questioning how I had missed every subtle cue. My home, once a sanctuary, felt like a battlefield. Every corner seemed imbued with memories of moments that were not truly mine. Yet amidst the chaos, a quiet shift began inside me. The clarity I had gained at the dinner table, the understanding that my boundaries and dignity were non-negotiable, strengthened with each new revelation. I realized that the more they tried to manipulate me, the more determined I became to reclaim my life. I started taking meticulous steps. I documented everything: texts, emails, receipts, messages. I organized my thoughts, each detail adding to the undeniable pattern of deceit. The more evidence I gathered, the more confident I became in my decision. This wasn't about impulsivity or stubbornness. It was about truth, autonomy, and self-respect. By the time the week ended, I was no longer reacting solely from shock and betrayal. I was acting with intention. I could see clearly the roles each person had played: the manipulation, the performance, the emotional coercion. And for the first time, I felt entirely in control of my own response. I had moved beyond the emotional storm into strategic clarity. The escalation, with all its intensity, had an unintended consequence. It revealed the real stakes, the true intentions of everyone involved, and the depth of the deception. And while it was exhausting, it also laid the groundwork for the next phase, what I would call the dark moment, the point at which everything I knew about love, trust, and family would be tested to its absolute limit. The nights were the hardest. Alone in my apartment, Scout curled at my feet. I felt a hollow ache that no amount of logic or evidence could fill. Every familiar object, the couch where Evan and I had planned Sunday mornings, the kitchen island where we had imagined cooking together, the bookshelves filled with novels we had picked out side by side, seemed suddenly alien, almost mocking. They were reminders of a life that had never truly existed. I replayed that dinner endlessly, like a film stuck on loop. Olivia's words echoing in the dining room. Rowan will always be part of my life. He is family. If you cannot accept that, Samantha, then maybe you shouldn't marry me. Every syllable now felt like a hammer to my chest. The calm, measured woman I had trusted, gone, replaced by someone orchestrating a narrative I had been unknowingly cast in. Guilt tried to creep in, whispering that perhaps I had overreacted, that maybe my interpretation was too rigid, too traditional. But then I remembered the apartment photo, the co-tenancy, the wedding planner's forwarded emails, the meticulous script for Rowan's speech. It wasn't paranoia, it was betrayal, pure and calculated. And yet, the knowledge offered no comfort, only a deeper sense of isolation. I wandered through the apartment in a haze, Scout padding silently behind me. Every room held a memory, a fragment of hope that now felt poisoned. I touched the edge of the dining table, recalling laughter, shared meals, discussions about art and architecture. The contrast between those moments and the reality, the deceit, the manipulation, was so sharp it made my chest tighten. Even my friends seemed distant. Those I had relied on for support hesitated, unsure how to navigate the social minefield that had erupted around this scandal. Some whispered their concerns. Others simply avoided the topic altogether. The isolation was suffocating. I realized, painfully, that for the first time in a long while, I had no one to turn to who could fully understand the layers of betrayal I faced. That night, I sat on the floor of my bedroom, back against the bed, Scout's head resting on my lap. Tears came unbidden, soaking through my pajamas. I allowed myself to grieve, not just for Evan or Olivia, but for the illusions I had held, the dreams I had nurtured, the trust I had given without hesitation. The grief was raw, unfiltered, and necessary. It was the bottom of the well, the point at which all pretenses and rationalizations fell away. I thought about the wedding, the flowers, the venue, the carefully curated details we had chosen together. All of it meant nothing now. I had been planning a life with someone who had never intended for me to be part of it in any meaningful way. The magnitude of the deception pressed on me, a weight that seemed impossible to lift. And yet, even in that darkness, a flicker of awareness began to emerge. I recognized the pattern of manipulation, the way Olivia and Rowan had woven a network of control around me. Understanding it didn't erase the pain, but it allowed me to see the situation with a new lens, not as a personal failure, but as an orchestrated scheme in which I had been unwittingly involved. I remembered something my therapist, Dr. Chen, had once told me. When someone asks you to give up your boundaries in the name of growth or love, they are not asking you to evolve, they are asking you to disappear. That idea, which had seemed abstract at first, crystallized that night. I hadn't failed. I hadn't misjudged. I had been confronted with a choice to surrender my identity, and I had refused. By the early hours of the morning, I felt the beginnings of resolve. The tears slowed, replaced by a quiet, simmering determination. I couldn't change what had happened, but I could control my response. I could reclaim my space, my life, and my sense of self. The darkness hadn't broken me. It had illuminated the stakes, the deception, and the necessity of firm boundaries. Scout nudged my hand, reminding me that life went on outside this maelstrom of manipulation. I looked down at him, his trust and love unconditional, and realized that this small, loyal creature represented something real, untainted by deceit. It was enough to start rebuilding from here. The dark moment, as agonizing as it was, had laid the foundation for my next step. I knew that eventually, clarity and evidence would empower me to confront the situation fully, to take action, and to reclaim my life in a way that preserved my dignity. For the first time since that dinner, I felt a sense of direction amidst the chaos, a promise that the ending of this chapter wouldn't be defined by betrayal, but by my choice to rise above it. The morning light spilled through the industrial windows of my loft, catching dust motes that danced lazily in the sun. Scout lay curled at my feet, a gentle reminder that life continued beyond the storm of betrayal. For the first time in weeks, I felt the clarity of purpose that had eluded me in the dark hours. It started with a message forwarded by Grace, the wedding planner. An email thread between Olivia and her mother, dated weeks before the dinner confrontation, outlined Rowan's ceremony remarks setup. The details were meticulous: the speech, the symbolic gestures, the orchestrated smiles. It wasn't a test, it was a plan, executed with precision. And suddenly, everything clicked. The apartment, the co-tenancy, the financial transfers, the scripted ultimatum. I leaned back in my chair, heart pounding as the weight of comprehension settled over me. The realization was bitter but empowering. I wasn't a naive participant in a modern relationship experiment. I had been targeted, manipulated, and used. And yet, I had survived. More importantly, I had all the evidence I needed to reclaim my autonomy. I began compiling it methodically. Emails, texts, photos, receipts, screenshots. Each piece told a story that no one could deny. Olivia's claims of collaboration, her insistence that this was a boundary test, her attempts to frame me as unreasonable, they all unraveled in the face of the evidence. Rowan's involvement, the apartment, the co-tenancy, it was all documented. Then came an unexpected voice of truth. Noah, my best friend, called me. "Sam," he said softly, "you need to see this. You're not overreacting. You're not losing your mind. You have the full picture now." He had gathered additional proof. Communications from Olivia and Rowan's mutual contacts, indications of premeditation, and even mentions of similar manipulations with other couples. Hearing him confirm the pattern was strangely validating. The gaslighting that had haunted me, the whispers of, "maybe you're too traditional, maybe you don't understand evolved relationships," began to dissolve. I wasn't the problem. The manipulation had been real, systematic, and deliberate. With this knowledge, I made a decision. Not impulsive, not reactive, but deliberate. I would remove myself entirely from the situation. The engagement, the wedding, the relationship, I would sever every tether without bitterness or theatrics. My dignity and self-respect were non-negotiable, and I would not allow the deceit to define me. The next step was practical. I drafted a concise, firm message to Grace, canceling all wedding arrangements permanently. Venue, catering, flowers, music, all canceled. Deposits handled by Olivia's family, so no financial fallout for me, but the symbolic act of taking control was liberating. I would not let them manipulate me further, financially or emotionally. Then came the confrontation. Olivia showed up at my loft, tears already streaked down her face, mascara smudged, hands trembling. She tried to explain, to justify, to plead, her words filled with the same buzzwords she had always used: growth, emotional evolution, boundary testing. But this time, I saw through the veneer. "You don't test loyalty by demanding betrayal," I said quietly, my voice calm but unwavering. "I never failed a test. You never wanted a partner. You wanted an audience." For a moment, her facade cracked. I could see the recognition in her eyes. Finally, she understood that I had seen through the performance. She tried to argue, attempting to reduce the complexity of her manipulations into noble intentions. I listened, unmoved. The conversation was no longer about debate, it was about closure. I handed her a list of her belongings, boxed and labeled neatly by the door. "You have until the weekend to collect everything," I said. No anger, no spectacle, just clarity and boundary. My home was mine again. The space I had feared would feel poisoned now felt like sanctuary reclaimed. As she left, shoulders slumped and energy depleted, I realized the power I held wasn't in retaliation, it was in self-possession. I had the final say over my life, my space, and my choices. The emotional manipulation had failed. I had turned the tables not through confrontation or revenge, but by maintaining my integrity and control. That moment was transformative. The clarity, the evidence, the strategic decisiveness, it all coalesced into a newfound strength. I wasn't just surviving, I was actively reclaiming my narrative, and in that reclamation, I discovered an essential truth. True power isn't about dominating others, but about mastering oneself and refusing to be complicit in deception. In the weeks that followed, the ripple effects of the confrontation spread faster than I could have imagined. Portland's social circles are small, and word of the $90,000 wedding disaster traveled like wildfire. Friends, acquaintances, and mutual contacts began to whisper, some out of concern, some out of curiosity, others with glee. Olivia's family, who had orchestrated so much of the narrative, found themselves under scrutiny. Thomas, her father, had spent months framing me as emotionally unstable and controlling, but now, with the evidence of his daughter's premeditation circulating quietly among those in the know, his credibility began to erode. People questioned how he had allowed such manipulation under his watch, how he could have condoned or even encouraged the emotional experiments that had targeted me. Meanwhile, Olivia faced repercussions that I had only partly anticipated. The nonprofit she worked for, while initially hesitant to intervene, launched an internal investigation when the financial transfers to Rowan's company came to light. Though she had not technically stolen funds, the blending of personal projects with organizational money was enough to suspend her pending review. Her colleagues, once charmed by her charisma and reputation for innovation, began to distance themselves. Invitations dwindled, calls went unanswered, and the aura of professional authority she had cultivated evaporated almost overnight. Rowan, too, faced the consequences of her actions. Her carefully curated podcast and public persona took a hit once the truth began to surface. Sponsors dropped episodes, listeners flagged content, and online communities began dissecting her past manipulations. Her attempts to rebrand in Arizona with a new wellness venture failed spectacularly within months. Public perception, once malleable and forgiving, had turned against her. The charm and emotional evolution rhetoric that had captivated so many were now seen as instruments of coercion and control. I watched all this unfold from a distance, not with malice, but with a quiet sense of vindication. The people who had sought to manipulate and control me were now facing the reality of their choices, and I, the one they had underestimated, had emerged intact, stronger, wiser, and resolute. Even the interactions with Olivia carried a strange sense of poetic justice. The last time I saw her, she was volunteering at a charity event, pouring champagne for guests, her once magnetic presence diminished, tired, and subdued. Our eyes met briefly, an unspoken acknowledgement passing between us. No confrontation, no dramatic denouement, just the recognition that the game had ended, and I had walked away unscathed. Scout, my constant companion, seemed to sense the shift in energy. He followed me everywhere, tail wagging, as if reminding me that the small, loyal constants in life were the ones worth holding on to. He didn't care about social standing, schemes, or manipulations. He cared about presence, honesty, and love. The simple, unassailable truths that had eluded the others in their pursuit of control. I began to rebuild, starting with my living space. The loft became a sanctuary, a place free from manipulation and pretense. Every piece of furniture, every object I kept reflected my values, not the approval or expectations of others. I donated items that had been tied to Olivia or her family's influence. tokens of a life that was never truly mine. It was liberating, the physical act of removing remnants of control that had no place in my future. Socially, too, I began to reclaim normalcy. Friends who had stayed close became more central, their support unwavering. Noah remained a rock, a reminder that loyalty and trust are earned, not demanded. Slowly, I began tentatively dating again, meeting people as Samantha, not as the woman who had been manipulated into a modern relationship experiment. It was ordinary, yet extraordinary in its simplicity. Meanwhile, the fallout for Olivia and Rowan continued. Rumors of professional misconduct, personal manipulations, and failed ventures circulated through Portland's nonprofit and creative communities. Their carefully constructed facades of enlightenment and emotional sophistication crumbled in real time. People began to connect the dots, uncovering patterns of coercion and deception with other couples. Their influence waned. Their credibility, once unassailable, became a cautionary tale. And I remained untouched, not because I had sought revenge, but because I had refused to participate further. My boundaries, once challenged, had held firm. My life, once threatened with manipulation, was now mine to direct. I had walked away from toxicity, and in doing so, had preserved my dignity, my self-respect, and my peace. The lesson was clear, even if unspoken. Those who manipulate others eventually face the consequences of their actions, but only those who maintain their integrity, their sense of self, and their boundaries can emerge unscathed. Watching the fallout unfold was not satisfying in a petty sense, but it was deeply affirming. Justice, in its quietest form, had arrived. And in the calm after the storm, I realized something even more profound. Power isn't about dominating others. It's about mastering oneself. By reclaiming my life, I had reclaimed my story. I had endured deception, betrayal, and manipulation, and yet I stood, intact, whole, and ready to build anew. Months later, the loft had become more than just a home. It was a symbol of rebirth. The sunlight poured through the huge windows each morning, illuminating the exposed brick and open space. Scout, ever loyal, greeted each day with quiet excitement, a reminder that life continued in its simple, honest rhythms. I had started to rebuild not only my space, but myself. Therapy sessions with Dr. Chen helped me untangle the threads of manipulation, teaching me that boundaries are not walls to keep love out, but foundations on which to stand. I learned to trust my instincts again, to recognize when my comfort and values were being compromised, and to understand that refusing to participate in deceit is not weakness, it is strength. Socially, I reconnected with friends who had been sidelined, finding joy in ordinary interactions, untainted by performance or expectation. Noah remained my anchor, the friend who had quietly supported me through the chaos, reminding me that loyalty is earned, not assumed. Slowly, I allowed myself to consider new relationships, not out of necessity, but from a place of genuine curiosity and openness. The world of Olivia and Rowan moved on without me. Olivia, once radiant and commanding, had faded into exhaustion and professional setbacks. Rowan's manipulations were exposed, leaving her credibility in tatters. I did not celebrate their downfall. I did not need to. The satisfaction lay in my own clarity, my own freedom, and the knowledge that I had preserved my dignity. Walking away had been the hardest decision, but also the most empowering. Some ultimatums don't destroy relationships, they reveal them. Some betrayals are lessons in disguise, and sometimes saying a quiet, firm "okay" is the most powerful response of all. I had learned that true growth does not come from accommodating others' games, nor from enduring emotional experiments. It comes from honoring your own values, protecting your own boundaries, and refusing to disappear in the name of someone else's agenda. As I brewed my morning coffee, Scout resting by my feet, I realized I was finally living my own story. Free from manipulation, free from performance, free from the shadow of others' expectations. And that, I knew, was the foundation on which a life worth living is built.